Hey, good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining. I really appreciate it. The Safer E-commerce Day is a passion project of ours. We kicked it off last year and we will continue to host it for the future generations to come and see how we can make the internet a little safer. So for today's installment, we have a very dear friend of ours, Kari Kammel, the director of Center for Anti-Counterfeiting and Product Protection. Kari, welcome so much. I appreciate you. I know your schedule is gangbusters, so I'm super excited that you were able to make time for us.
Thanks, Melissa. Happy to be here.
Outstanding. I'm going to frame up a little bit of the counterfeiting, and I am not a anti-counterfeiting expert. I'm not a counterfeiting expert. I know that I'm terrified of counterfeits and the societal harm that they're causing. I'm just going to give you a couple of stats for the audience just to think more broadly about what we're up against. So we know that counterfeiters are involved in the legal production, knockoffs, in almost, I think, virtually every area you could possibly think of. Food, drinks, alcohol, which we know is a huge problem and can cause severe, severe health concerns. Shoes, pharmaceuticals, electronics, auto parts, toys, currency, concert tickets, gasoline, minerals. It's endless. It's absolutely endless. And I think probably the most frightening one for me outside of the medicine landscape is the news alerts we saw last year. The FAA came in, and I believe there was a British company that got swept up into it, selling counterfeit plane parts into the airplane market. And if you think about, and we'll touch on this later, you think about the consumers of counterfeits, and there's the victims, and then there's the complicit consumer that gets in it. And when you think about the victimization of people, I spent a lot of time on airplanes, and it's a soul-crushing reality that the supply chain was penetrated and counterfeit airplane parts were injected into it for cost savings from the purchaser, unknowing from the purchaser, or for cost savings from an illicit actor. The counterfeit fashion market, and this is a rough estimate, 450 billion per year. It's an outrageous number that we are as consumers being touched by. A couple of product types and the percents I'm quoting for you today are coming out of different research being done by the ACAPP Center, or either being directly created by your center or you are in partnership with other universities doing this research. 31% clothing, 20% watches, and luxury goods and consumers. We'll touch on this later. Is interesting. No harm, no foul. You want the watch. No harm, no foul. You want the shirt and the logo. But that's absolutely not true. Computers and accessories, toys, medicines, art. Again, no harm, no foul. Is it really that bad? It is. So before we begin, I want to zoom way out because I think your background, although she has a very lovely, modest team, did not let me read her bio. I would love it if you would frame up your journey to get where you are today as a leading expert to fight the vileness of counterfeits and how you came to be such a passionate advocate for disrupting this environment.
Sure. So I have been at the ACAPP Center now for almost 10 years, I believe 10 years in April. And I fell into anti-counterfeiting, I think, in the same way everybody else does, which is sort of by accident. I've heard of very few people that take, a very distinct career path and they have a goal to work in anti-counterfeiting or brand protection. Although with our current generation of students, I'm hoping some of them have been getting into the field early on. I'm a lawyer by training, but I had a very non-traditional legal career path. I took a lot of IP classes, was very interested in IP law, health law. I ended up doing international human rights, which is very different, but a lot of public international law. And then came back stateside after some time overseas and was looking for a new job and saw this opening. And I was like, wow, this is interesting. Anti-counterfeiting. And I'm like, wait a second. I think I know what this is. I think I've seen this before. So this topic wasn't taught in law school. I never took it in my criminal law classes. I never took it in my intellectual property law classes. We studied about trademarks and copyrights and even, the internet way back then, but not any of this sort of put together. So I was really curious about the position. And I applied for it and got the job and started this very incredible journey into this very strange strange but very real space. And I would say even in the almost 10 years I've been in it, it's gone from something that happens in back alleys or in other countries to something that is on the forefront everywhere, that's even impacted my own family. And it's becoming something that's such a pervasive threat now. And the risks are becoming so much higher that it's something that I'm passionate about, right? I want to be able to, you know, hope that my work has some impact on protecting people in some way, whether that is people that I know, or people even that I don't know, whether that's other consumers, out there that are purchasing goods, or even the brands that have invested, into this and are trying to protect their IP for a lot of different reasons. Because I think even if we get to the point as societies where we can't protect intellectual property, it changes everything, right? Even from a societal perspective. And I think we're at a real risk right now. What does that look like, especially with some of the technologies that are out there right now? Is some of our IP going to be protectable if we continue to go the way things are going? So yes, I am very passionate about this. And as you said, it's something that crosses any industry and almost any product line that's successful. And that's something I learned from the very beginning at ACAPP. My mentors were telling me if someone has a successful product and there is a demand for it, it's going to be counterfeited. So be ready for it. And it's going to come, in a variety of different ways, oftentimes, ways that may not be easily anticipated.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And much like the path that you took, I think it's going to resonate with a lot of the payments folks listening. Is payments people don't study payments to become payments people. You are something else, and you're drawn to moving money, the enablement of commerce, or disrupting bad actors. But you can be an attorney, an accountant, you could be a professor, you could just be a human that's interested in money movement. And then you discover enabling cool commerce, which is awesome, but disrupting bad commerce, well, that's a cocktail party story. That's really cool. Let's see if we can get more of us doing that piece of it. So I thank you for that. I appreciate it. And I think it's you just touched on a very important, we're at a crossroads of disruption, or it's just, we have to throw our hands up and say that it is what it is, buyer beware, right? I think we still have awesome runway to be able to disrupt with good partnering and good government and good legislation and good global thinking about this. We can't do it in isolation, obviously, which leads me to my next two questions. I think they tie together well. For those of you, the audience that don't know ACAPP and the university, could you explain to them what is the ACAPP as it relates to the university? And then dovetail into, how do we get private folks outside of academia more engaged with the work that you're doing? So our audience is going to be people in the payments ecosystem that can clip the monetization of the counterfeit. So we can't impact the development, creation, or theft, but we can stop the money flow. So that's a really important group of people that you now have listening to you.
Yeah, sure. So the Center for Anti-Counterfeiting and Product Protection, as you mentioned, the ACAPP Center, we've been at the university now for about 15 years. We are part of the actual university of Michigan State University. We started out as a very small research project when a couple of brands came to the university and said, look, we're dealing with this problem of trademark counterfeiting, also copyright piracy. We've never seen anyone really study it from an academic perspective. And we're hoping you all can bring sort of that lens of being able to look at the overarching problem, because we're all in the weeds dealing with this every day. So that program was successful. It grew, and it finally grew into what we are now, which is the multidisciplinary center. So we focus on three things, primarily research, education, and outreach. So our research deals with looking at this problem from a variety of different disciplinary backgrounds. So everyone from economists to psychologists to lawyers to supply chain experts, packaging experts, IT, engineering, marketing, public relations, people that analyze online consumer behavior, sort of the whole gamut of academic disciplines studying this, trying to move the needle a bit in the right direction. So right now we have about 35 global researchers on our research council from all over the world that are interested in studying this problem. Most of them don't do this as their only form of research. They researched a whole bunch of other things within their discipline, but are interested in getting a bite of this, right? And trying to apply some of their theories to what is happening here. We also have been actively engaged with industry since our inception. So, for example, since 2020, we worked or engaged with over 500 different organizations globally, and that can be everyone from law enforcement to the brands themselves to some payment providers, e-commerce platforms, social media platforms, law firms, technology service providers, other academics, sort of anyone within this sort of larger ecosystem of brand protection. And we like to engage with people, we like to work with people, and I would say we definitely have an open door if that's something that's of interest to someone to say, hey, have you looked at this part of the problem yet? Maybe this is an area or perspective we haven't seen yet, and we would be interested in looking at that. So we often try to have sort of this cycle with research and then outreach. So after we research something and we publish it, we turn it into educational materials, mostly for the private sector. But then we like to hear feedback. We like to hear if people have tried to apply it, if this has any impact in the real world. We don't like to just publish for the sake of publishing, which a lot of academics do. But for us, it's really important that it can have a real world impact. And then to hear feedback, how can we refine it? How can we improve the next round of it?
Outstanding. And I'm going to get really nerdy on some of your research. I think it's phenomenal. It's written it's not a pure academia exercise. It's very relatable to people that are in the space, disrupting the space.
Cool. So good.
Yeah, or being impacted by the space. Yeah, so I think the research that you guys are doing is amazing. One of the more recent ones that you've published, and I will be a super nerd and read off the title and just give you just a couple sentences on what it is, but the title of it is Illicit Trade, Exploring the Interconnection of Illicit Trade in Firearms, Tobacco, and Counterfeit Goods, which I think are three really interesting subject areas. Counterfeit goods is a huge one because it's anything that lives in that, but tobacco and firearms are fascinating because of the societal damage that these two products are doing. So the research paper is 279-page report that explores the ecosystem of the three aforementioned goods. Each line of business is structured to cover off on the size of the issue, the routes of goods movements, drivers and contextual factors, crime scripts and modus operandi, actors and countermeasures. And I thought that was such a great way to distill down the problem, because it is bite-sized pieces of a very big problem that if you don't look at all of these, you really don't have a good idea of what the criminal looks like doing it. Then how do they do it? And then what are they abusing to get into the supply chain? Payment platforms, social media, whomever. So it's an awesome way to do it. Page 16, chapter 2, and I'll stop being this nerdy. There's a line written in there that reads, exploring product counterfeiting as a form of transnational illicit trade and comparing the elements of this crime to other types of illicit trade may lead to the development of more efficient crime prevention strategies, which I think is a fascinating topic or a fascinating concept when you look at the topic, the normalization and the compare and contrast, but there's not a good data set of how big is this? Where is it geographically the most problematic? How do we have a common language set? Like, what do you want to see in that area to help us combat this problem? Like, do you have thoughts on that?
So, you bring up a really interesting point, and I would say, from the research side, it's something for us that is a very useful tool, which is looking at something that already exists, and especially for like a lot of our criminologists, which I think most of the authors of the particular paper you're referring to are criminologists, and really studying different aspects of crime and how ones that maybe have been studied more or have had more access to studying, you can still pull out the theories and apply them to other types of criminal activity, right? And I think we see that with a lot of different academic disciplines when we're looking at this problem, because it is a unique problem, but it overlaps with so many other things. So especially when we're talking about counterfeiting, we know it overlaps extensively with other forms of illicit trade, like you just mentioned. It's also overlapping with other types of fraud. So at its core, it's still a financial problem, right? People aren't in counterfeiting usually because of I don't know, because they're out to get a certain company or they're making a political statement. They're in it for the money. So that actually makes it a little bit easier to focus, right? To know that someone is doing this because they're in it for the money. And not to be totally cliche, but one of the ways to go after this is follow the money. Where is the money going? Like with any other type of financial crime, right? But I think a lot of people often get distracted by it, by where it is, the fact that it's impacting so many brands, trying to pin down all these other things. But to just a reminder that it is a financially motivated crime. So people are doing it to make money and profit off of other people. That means they don't care if people are going to get hurt by it. They don't care if a consumer is going to use a product and be injured or die. They're just looking to make that quick turnaround with the least resistance as possible. So wherever resistance can come up, there's a lot of theories around this as to how to disrupt that or how to prevent it from happening. But we do know they also go to the path of least resistance. So for example, if one brand is taking a lot of actions against a counterfeiter, they're probably going to go and just sort of switch directions into an area where they're not getting a lot of pushback or surveillance or feedback, with that. So we tend to see them gravitate towards areas where they know there's not going to be a lot of resistance. Back to your other question too about how big is this, what countries does this impact? Probably the best research out there on that was done by the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So their economists have gone through and looked at a lot of different countries and in the counterfeit goods that are either coming out or ending up in or being transited through. They have really interesting reports that look at provenance countries, transit countries, and destination countries based on industry type, as well as just different things related to those countries' customs agencies, because a lot of the statistics are based off of customs seizures that come from there. But because it is a type of illicit trade, it still is almost impossible to accurately quantify, right? I mean, it's the underbelly of illicit commerce. And as someone jokingly said, the counterfeiters don't publish their stats, so we don't know, exactly how exactly where these numbers are. We know though the problem is growing exponentially. The ease at which any consumer now can purchase a counterfeit is much more than it was 10 years ago when I first started in this field, significantly more.
Absolutely. It's interesting. One of the questions I had teed up for you was the origin, transit, destination, and the risks of each. But I think it'd be more interesting to think about the exploitation, the counterfeiters exploiting technological advancements. But before we get to that, I'd like to zoom out a little bit and touch on, from the research that you have been exposed to, are the counterfeit groups, and you touched on, you didn't say the word, but it's convergence. So we're starting to converge them, the known transnational threat actors, and now the counterfeit. There's no distance between them anymore. They are the same groups of humans swapping out products because they're product agnostic. They don't care. You're right. Absolutely correct. Is the concentration of humans that are at the head of these groups, what do they look like from a country of origin perspective? Is there the known bad actor, or is this now a commodity that anybody can get into this business?
So I don't know exact answers for you because we have not specifically researched that, but from those people that I talk to in the field, it's some combination of both, right? I know that, from a lot of our law enforcement friends that we work with, there are organized crime groups that are very involved in this, right? And are using this to make money for a lot of different reasons, right? Sometimes just for the sake of money, sometimes for other purposes. We also know this is a space where a lot of entrepreneurial counterfeiters get into it because they realize how easy it is to get into market. I've even heard stories where some people start out as counterfeiters and then they realize they can have their own legitimate business now that they've built up a clientele, and they switch over to their own legitimate products at some point, but having gotten their initial capital investment from the sale of counterfeits. So all different kinds of stories that we hear around this. And I would say you have everything from what we would call a regular civilian who doesn't know what they're doing, but they may be a big like super fans, for example. So someone who's a big sports fan of a college or university or even, a professional team, they may, decide to go out and make some product that they're so proud of because they love their team so much, and then they sell it and they don't realize they are now manufacturing counterfeit goods. Oftentimes, those sports teams will find a way to try to educate them or say, okay, we'll give you like a crafter's license, or we'll give you a license to do that, but you can only do this or that, and not do that. So I would say those are probably people that don't know. They really are super fans. They love their team in so many ways, but they are actually manufacturing and selling counterfeit goods. And then you have varying levels all the way to some of the worst, the worst bad actors that we talk about. And within there, I think there's points for education, and that may work with certain people who just don't know what they're doing and they don't want to be involved in criminal activities. But then there's a point where that education doesn't matter anymore, right? And you have people that are going to do it no matter what, unless there is something there to stop them or to make it not worth their while anymore.
It's fascinating. And thank you for that answer. And that's exactly what I wanted to shine a light on for the payments ecosystem is it is not just the worst of the worst bad actor that we need to be cognizant of. It is the super fan. And I love that example is there's a husband and a wife who love their sports team and like, hey, let's make XYZ product and then sell it. Awesome. They have no clue. Wouldn't even dawn on them because they're such super fans and they know their intent is pure. But from a payments perspective, that's in scope for an enforcement problem from either the brand or a card brand saying, hey, we've got a complaint. They're not allowed this. They have no permission to use this logo, tagline, whatever they're using. So as payment disruptors, we need to be much more creative in the way that we think about the product alignment and understanding what simple questions do you have a license to use the logo? Just a question during underwriting. And if the answer comes back no, like I'd suggest you go get one because they're going to find you and ask you questions. Yeah. I love the idea that education to keep out the soft actors because they're not bad actors. These are just people doing cool stuff and being creative. And it's interesting when you overlay those humans with social media, which essentially says you can do everything, be everything you want, just do it on social media 1, 2, 3. So you have the passion of these humans who are like, well, I can sell it on social media 1, 2, 3. And off they go. And now they have a reach of tens of thousands of humans who can engage with the content. So from a research perspective, we all know the abuse of the social media networks. We're going to call them 1, 2, 3 for the conversation. How much in role and responsibility are you seeing from your reviews? How good are they at getting out the illicit actor and helping to educate the, oops, I shouldn't be doing that, but I didn't know. Are they taking steps in that direction? Or are they hands up on a tech platform, not my worry?
So that's a really hard question. And part of the reason why it's so hard is because we don't see any of the actual data, right? So we see only what's reported out, which is often in the form of some type of brand protection report to say, every year we pull down X number of listings. It's often complicated too, whether we're talking about, listing for illicit products, which I would put under the trademark counterfeit or copyright piracy category, or a whole bunch of other bad things, right? So we're talking right now, at least in our world, only of like illicit products, and what that is. So if any given platform says they pull down 500 million products a year, what we don't know is how long were those products up, how many of those products were sold, where did that money go? And in some way, was the brand ever notified, if it was a given brand that posting was up or a given number of postings was up, and then how many more of them are still up? So we don't know those numbers, so it's very hard for us to be able to say like, yes, this is effective, what's going on. What we do know, and that's in a lot of it we knew anecdotally from talking to brands across multiple industries, multiple countries, things like that, is that consumers don't know what to do if they're online and they buy a counterfeit product, right? And we ran our research survey last year in 2023. It was our first large consumer survey of what happens to consumers when they're shopping online, and their interaction with counterfeits, both intentional and unintentional purchases of it. And overwhelmingly, the responses from over 17 countries were that they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how or if they can even report to the platforms. They don't know if they should contact law enforcement. They don't know if they're supposed to throw it away. They don't know if they're supposed to keep it. They don't know what to do with it, which is really concerning on the educational side. That means that as people are, and it was overwhelming across all platforms that we saw with this in all countries. So that means consumers don't know what to do. And a lot of our researchers in this particular space and their advertising and public relations specialists note that when consumers don't know what to do, they sort of have this feeling of helplessness and they give up and they just go through with the purchase. And they just sometimes will go through and use it. It's sort of a psychological phenomenon when someone doesn't give you a very concrete thing. Like if you purchase a counterfeit, you can report it right here. This is what you do with it. So this is really disturbing. I think, and it's really scary. That means they're not getting educated on this, not only to prevent them from purchasing it, but if they do purchase it by accident, what do they do with it? I think of my own accidental purchase of counterfeits. I mean, every year in our household, there's at least a couple that we think we're purchasing a legitimate product and we get it, and it very obviously isn't. And I go through the little exercise. Can I report this? Can I actually report it and say, I think this is a suspected fake product? Not, I'm not happy with it. It didn't arrive as expected, like all the normal check boxes that you might normally list with a legitimate product. But I haven't found one where I could actually report that this was a suspected counterfeit product. I haven't actually been able to talk to someone to say like, hey, I'm really concerned about this. I think you should look into this and possibly pull down your other postings. And part of that is the way the law is set. So the law doesn't require any platforms to take down anything based on consumer complaints. So what you may hear about, and a lot of people might be familiar with, is the notice and takedown procedures, right? Which are required by the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, the DMCA. So that's if a brand owner or the owner of the mark or copyright makes a report, then they have to deal with it and take it down within a reasonable amount of time, but not if a consumer is reporting it. And especially if you're not even tracking how consumers are reporting it. If they just say dissatisfaction with a product, we then don't know how many consumers might actually be reporting that they're having this issue because there is no reporting mechanism for it.
That's incredible. And let me ask you this, opinion only, no one will get named. Is it by design they're doing it this way so they don't have to take the action? Or is it simply an oversight and trust and safety? What are your thoughts on that? Just an opinion.
I mean, it would be total speculation, but if we would really want to know how many consumers suspect that they are purchasing a counterfeit, I would think we would want that button there to be able to track it and at least be able to say, okay, here's a product that has been flagged. Are we concerned about it? Right? I mean, if we, again, and this is one of those analogies like we were talking earlier with converging crime. So I always try to think like, what would this look like in the brick and mortar setting? If I go to my local grocery store and I bought something that was, let's say, rotten milk, right? I get it home, it's horrible. I go back and complain. They're not just going to say, oh, you just want your money back, throw it away, we'll give you your money back, we're not going to record it. They're probably going to go back to that shelf, pull all the product of that particular product and test it and make sure that they're not going to get a bunch of people sick from it, right? It's almost like there's this different set of expectations in the brick and mortar environment that there is in the online environment. But if we're talking about particularly high risk products that can hurt someone, make them sick, injured, killed, that's pretty scary stuff that, a consumer can complain and there's no onus on anyone to take it down. They might take it down. I'm not saying that they wouldn't, but they're not required to, which is the difference.
It's an interesting, and it's a question I wanted to ask you, and I think this segues perfectly into it, is, are all counterfeits created equal? Right? So, and I've been thinking about this, t-shirts, clothing, watches, and divorcing ourselves from the back end idea that there's probably the world's worst humans are touching all of these products. We know that it's a horrible ecosystem, but from an enforcement perspective, we've got the luxury goods market that's beyond huge. But then we have the ones that the charging cable will burn your house down, or the baby machines will harm your child, or the baby food manipulation. The case from Eastern Europe ages ago was horrifying. But they're not big cases, they're tinier localized cases. So not all counterfeits are created equal then. We should, as a suggestion, as a monitoring enforcement perspective, the ones that cause the greatest amount of harm the fastest should be the ones that get prioritized versus the clothing and watches, or should we tackle them all? How do we tackle it?
That's a good question. And I don't know if I'm the right person to ask that question, but I mean, we teach something in our courses, which is the risk assessment for counterfeit products, right? And for each person going through this, we tell them, look at a given product, right? And here's your little box on how to create a risk assessment. What is the threat of harm, if someone was to get a counterfeit for that given product? And then what's the likelihood of that harm? Right. So, if you think of any given product, you can put it in there and it will tell you, I mean, you have a high likelihood of being really harmed by this, but there's not a lot of counterfeits out there because it's really easy to tell it's counterfeit. So the risk of it happening is low. But if it does happen, someone might die from it, right? Or another one saying there may be a lot of them out there, but the risk is very low. So I think, I mean, there's got to be some type of cost benefit analysis. You're right on that. I know, for example, a lot of governments prioritize cases that impact health and safety. And I think even at one point, one of the proposed pieces of legislation in the US was talking about bifurcating protection based on health and safety. I think from the perspective of what that looks like as far as legal liability, creating two classes of goods in the US under the Lanham Act, under two classes of goods for trademarks, would be problematic from enforcing a mark, because a mark should be enforced because it's a registered trademark, right? Not because of what it's on. But as far as like what you're prioritizing takedown, I mean, I know for sure during COVID, all COVID related stuff was prioritized and it was taken down off platforms very quickly, right? We're talking about, N95 masks, other types of things like that. So we know that it can be done. Some stuff is a much greater risk, especially if it is a known risk, right? If you know, I mean, what you're talking about, like I think it's the baby bassinets, or there was one about counterfeit car seats. Yeah, if someone's in that and they get in an accident, they're probably going to die, right? It's that simple. Perhaps, do I know the best way to do that? No, I'm probably not the right person to ask that question to, but yes, there are goods that cause more direct harm to consumers or have a higher probability of that, for sure.
And thank you for that answer. It's a complicated question, and I asked it intentionally to highlight to our payments folks who underwrite and provide money moving services to social media 123, major marketplaces 123, direct merchants all around the world. There's a set of criteria that's been published in academia that helps you risk rank your products. So that methodology exists. You can insert the product, probability of harm, what type of harm, consumer disenfranchisement, or death. So we can rank the categories. So we can set up, if I owned one of these giant payment ecosystems, I could probably ask to see that. Like, how do you rank what you're going to enforce? And then we proved it during COVID, and that was an excellent point. We proved we can do this because we did it really well during COVID. As they went up, they came back down. As they went up, they came back down. Phenomenal research came out of that. I'm sure you're familiar with the George Mason University project they did with 3M in doing the supply chain tracking and watching it go up and then come back down. And they were able to bring down tens of millions of illicit counterfeit goods that would have put people at risk. So we know there's a model. We know we can do it technologically. Now it's up to us in the payments ecosystem and then broadly legislatively to push everybody in the tech enablement ecosystem to start thinking about this and how they can disrupt it, and not simply saying, I don't have to, so I'm probably not going to. Let's throw some rigor in academia around this. We can impact the change and disrupt it. To that end, you touched on earlier one of the drivers, and you and I have had this conversation before, and I'm utterly fascinated by it, is the victim consumer. We've touched on them. They're out on the internet. They don't know what they bumped into. They do not know who to tell when they bump into it. And it's just, that's a sadness episode. But we also have the thrill seeker hedonistic buyer. So these are the ones that are out intentionally engaging with this. Who are these people? This is a fascinating bit of research from your survey. I'm still baffled by this one.
Fantastic. Well, first of all, a shout out to our research team that did this, Salim El-Habash, Anastasia Kononova, and Pat Huddleston, as well as two of their grad students. Fascinating survey, so much data. I think the report is over 300 pages long, and that doesn't even include, all of the data that came out of this. So we looked at a 17 country sample, and we tried to get a diversity of countries, diversity of languages, So this went out in the predominant language of any given country, translated in both directions. So all of the appropriate research procedures that go into that. And then we looked at, what people are doing online when they purchase counterfeits. So are they doing it intentionally? Are they unintentionally doing it? What happens? As we mentioned before, when they get it, what do they do with it? Did it harm them? All of these questions. And a lot of it reinforced what we've heard anecdotally from people all over the world that work in brand protection, right? That there are people that are doing this intentionally. There are people that are not doing this intentionally. That there's a lot of different factors, but one of the really, there were a lot of really interesting findings that came out of this. So a couple of them I'll just mention. So 40% of people bought counterfeit from e-commerce platforms. So that was one thing. Almost 40% bought them from social media platforms as well. So a high amount purchasing online. Not a ton brick and mortar, although that still was occurring. But one of the really fascinating findings that came out of us that we were not expecting at all, that we have our list of things that we expect that are going to come out of it, was that males were more likely to buy counterfeits than females. Younger participants purchased counterfeits, which that part wasn't surprising, but people who self-identified as religious were most likely to buy counterfeits. And if people were online shoppers, it positively predicted that they were going to be purchasing counterfeits, and that low-income participants were more likely to buy them. So buyers tended to be then male, younger, more religious identifying, frequent online shoppers from low-income households, which is something that we're not anticipating at all. I think our team ran those numbers multiple times to make sure that they were correct. But what it tells us too is that our anti-counterfeiting education that's targeted at consumers may not be reaching the right audience, right? Or the messaging may not be right. And this tells us in a similar way to marketing, when you market to a given consumer population, you have targeted messaging for different segments of the population that you're trying to do that. For anti-counterfeiting education, we have to do the same thing, right? Because that may look different in what that in who is doing what, when, and where. One of the interesting things is that came out of it was the hedonic motives piece. And I think you were going to ask me that, right? Like, what are the motives for people doing this? So yes, there's an economic benefit. People want to save money. They found a deal, they found a bargain. And that's what we've heard for years, right? That this is the only reason why people are buying counterfeit goods, or the main reason. So that does exist, but there's a hedonic motive, meaning people are enjoying counterfeit shopping, right? They're actually enjoying doing it. Social media is probably a good indicator for us of that, right? When we see the whole dupe culture and people that are really into, to the dupe culture and making videos off of it, or going on other people's, posts and following, a lot of these influencers who are bragging about, all of the dupes that they have, and they can get you, and you can click on their links to get more. I mean, we see it happening live on social media, but it's beyond that too. People are actually enjoying going after those counterfeit purchases.
Which is incredible and incredibly difficult from a disruption perspective to combat it on the payments ecosystem. I think in the obligation or the requirement of the social platforms in general to combat it, I think they have a much better opportunity being able to ferret out the people that are doing that than pure payments rails trying to understand when the consumer is out looking for it, if we can disrupt. And it's one of the questions actually I want to talk to you about is being able to disrupt it at multiple points of entry, not just at the purchase perspective. So if you think about counterfeit accessibility as a supply chain, you've got the ad network, the e-commerce platform, the social platform, the web hosting platform. There are so many pieces to the consumer and the bad actor meeting. Do you have any thoughts on, and have you guys thought about researching the actual supply chain end to end of how counterfeiters find purchasers, regardless of the driver of the purchaser, victim and or complicit strange actor buying weird things on the internet? Like, have you thought about expanding out? Like, if they never meet, does that make a difference?
So yes. So I'll answer your last question first. So yes. So one of our pieces of research that came out a couple of years ago. That was one of our first big analysis of e-commerce legislation in the US, or legislation in the US that's applicable to e-commerce around counterfeiting, looked at that. But we also sort of combined legal theory with criminological theory. And there's a theory, and I may have spoken about this last year at Safer E-commerce Day, but it's called the crime triangle. And it's the idea that in order for a crime to take place, there has to be a meeting of the offender, the victim, and that time and place, right? So if the three of those legs of the triangle never come together, the crime never occurs, right? So that's the whole, at least from our perspective, the proactive disruption. If you can remove one of those things from happening, then you're going to disrupt it. But if you wait till after it's already come together, that's all of the reactive work that we see everybody doing. That's the notice and takedown. That's the web scraping, trying to find postings and pull them down. It's already happened. Cat's out of the bag already. Counterfeits have already been sold. So you're right. There's a lot of different points for disruption, and there's different ways to do it. So according to this theory, there is a type of guardian around each of those legs of the triangle. So there's one that would be, in theory, around the e-commerce site, which would actually be the platform itself, that would protect their platform and make it in a way that is really challenging for bad actors to even access it, to be able to post something. There's something at another level up that might be called like a super controller, which might be the legislature, right? That might even change the requirements of how that meeting and time and place could happen. There's another one that would sit over the bad actor themselves, and that would be a way to prevent a bad actor from getting into that space. So that might be enhanced vetting. We know, at least in the US, Informed Consumers was passed, which requires some vetting of sellers, but not super stringent. But they do have basic requirements now. But it might be vetting the seller, it might be vetting the posts that they're going up, something proactive to keep them from getting there. And the interesting part then, which I think leads into one of the questions you just asked, is the guardian around the consumer. And that is giving the consumer education before they get to that point of purchase, right? Not after the fact, not on some other website somewhere else, hoping they'll watch a YouTube video, after they've made their purchase, but keeping them safe up into that point. And part of that is education, right? Is letting them know, whatever that may be. And I don't know exactly what the right messaging is, as we were just talking about from the study, that all has to be specifically tailored, but we know that they're not getting messaging on how to prevent themselves from getting into that exact triangle. So this seems simple, but it's really complicated, right? And what it looks like, and trying to do all those things. So we haven't looked at the entire e-commerce supply chain, but we do know that there are a lot of these instances where something can be done. And in fact, we find almost the opposite happening, and it seems that people are forcing the triangle together, instead of trying to protect it in ways that maybe are unintentional, but there's more of the triangle coming together than there is, the preventative measure of it being kept apart.
It's an interesting comment, and it is extraordinarily complicated in any space trying to keep bad actors and victims from meeting each other. And I love the triangle. Thank you for that. And I think from a technology perspective, everybody's got a lot of work to do to keep consumers safe, and consumers have to be protected from themselves. At the end of the day, we are protecting them from themselves, and bad actors are motivated by profit to get in front of them. And they don't have budget constraints or PTO. They are coming and coming and we know that. Yeah. You and I could continue this conversation for hours and hours. I know your time is very valuable, so I'm going to wrap it up with a thank you. Thank you to the work that you do. Thank you to the university. I'm going to make sure that we post links to your work and how people can get involved, and we can start sharing more data with each other, and hopefully get consumers into a place where they're at least being critical about purchases and not simply being victimized on social platforms, because consumers are better than that. We can push them to be a little bit more accountable. I don't want to make them the babes in the woods, so let's get them to be a little bit more critical, and getting social platforms to think more aggressively about how they can protect consumers, because more happy consumers, more commerce, everyone wins. It's, it seems it's a slightly easier from that perspective. From the combatant perspective, we got a lot of work to do, my friend. But you are awesome, and I thank you so much. And if you ever want to come back and get in front of the payments ecosystem, let me know. We're happy to host you whenever you need.
Awesome. Thanks, Melissa. And just to everybody else too, if anyone is interested in working with us or hearing more information, we're happy to chat.
Outstanding. Thank you, my friend.